Hi guys, Ricky Pope here, and this week on the Christian Nerds Unite podcast, I'm joined by E. Stephen Burnett of lorehaven.com, plus scripture and nerdy news, and we'll get to all of that right after this. Hey guys, thanks so much for listening every week. I'm super excited about my guest this week, but I have been under the weather. So I'm actually going to set aside this week, and we're not going to have scripture or nerdy news. So if you need your fix there, definitely go check out one of the other episodes. But I did want to go ahead and bring you E. Stephen Burnett's interview, where we talk about lorehaven.com. We talk about Christian publishing, especially in the fantasy realm. So let's get right into our interview. E. Stephen Burnett, it is so great to have you on the Christian Nerds Unite podcast today.
Well, thanks for inviting me into the studio. It's been a little chilly and wet down here in Texas, but it's really warm and cozy in this place.
Nice. I was going to say, I'm actually just north of you in Oklahoma, so it has been cold and wet here as well.
Yeah, I actually appreciate
warm up.
I appreciate the cold weather. It aids the creative process to me. There's nothing to do outside. You can't really go out there. You don't feel guilty for not going outside and touching the grass because the grass is powerful wet. Instead, you can stay inside, work on a story, read a nice book, sip some hot cocoa, and maybe assemble a website to help us explore fantastical stories for God's glory.
Speaking of, give us a little bit. So for those of our audience who might not be familiar with you, tell us a little bit about who Stephen Burnett is and what Lorehaven is.
Well, personally, I'm one of those homeschooled kids who grew up with fantastical stories. There was a Bible anime. If anybody remembers the anime Superbook, and then there was an anime called Flying House. Now, there's a remake. There's a CG remake that they did, and I'm less familiar with that one. But back when I was a kid, it was an honest-to-goodness dubbed anime with the cast of Kimba the White Lion, the English cast. And that's sort of helped convince me that fantastical stories and the Bible go together. Now, that doesn't mean that scripture is just a story, but that means that you can work the fantasy elements around the true story of the gospel across Old and New Testaments. And from there, I got into Adventures in Odyssey, a bunch of other amazing fandoms. And then getting older, of course, you had the usual suspects like Frank Peretti, Ted Decker, and the Left Behind series. And a bunch of those early voices got me started on the track of enjoying not just fantastical stories, the usual superhero movies, Star Wars, fandoms, but uniquely Christian-made fantastical stories, and by which I mean fantasy, science fiction, and beyond, maybe even some horror and paranormal here and there. Not just made for entertainment or recreation, but specifically for the glory of God, not to preach, but to flesh out the gospel results, like play it out in a simulated world. Like, what would these virtues, what would these ideas look like, specifically as applied to realistic human characters? So that really led me to an earlier website that I joined up with that is now effectively changed into lorehaven.com, which is a free resource for fans, families, homeschoolers, church influencers, cultural conservatives to explore the best Christian-made fantastical stories for God's glory.
Awesome. Well, you say you started with one and it kind of turned into Lorehaven. And you say, you got into these early Christian animes. What made you decide that, there needed to be a website to kind of disseminate the best of out there?
Well, my special interest is Christian made fantastical novels, but a lot of the resources we were seeing were going in one of two directions. One of them was specifically trying to equip and train authors and creators of these stories, websites,
Mhm.
a conference or two, networks, people talking about inside baseball industry stuff, the craft of writing, how to get an agent, how to pitch your novel, like that kind of thing. And there is absolutely a place for that. And I'm still very involved with at least one organization called Realm Makers, which does conferences every year specifically
Hmm.
for that purpose. But the other direction I saw people going, and I've had my hand in that too, is Christian ministries and websites that review general popular culture, geeky
Hmm.
type movies, the franchise stuff, which
Yeah.
we absolutely need more of that too, because especially when a lot of people are complaining about these stories, we need faithful Christian voices that are
Mhm.
discerning these for the glory of God. Actually, my first nonfiction book, The Pop Culture Parent. Hold on, chill a moment. Here we go. This is by me and my friend Ted Turneau, who
Oh,
teaches worldview studies in Czech Republic. Yeah. Okay. Good. Good. This one
I
sticks out.
totally
It's
I
an awesome
totally
cover.
forgot when we started this conversation. I had forgotten that you were the co-author of Pop Culture Parent. I've had Ted on the show before.
Yes, he is fantastic, and his
Yes.
last book, Oases of Imagination, is absolutely terrific. It's a doorstopper, but for good reason. It is a terrific resource. Ted wrote a book called Apologetics, which also really
Yep.
helped me. And so there's some overlap between this book and engaging general popular culture, including the geeky stuff, the fantastical worlds that non-Christian creators have created that also ultimately glorify God, but apart from their intention. My interest, though, is authors, storytellers who are glorifying God by design. The stories they
Mhm.
are making are acts of worship, not to preach, because that's the job of a preacher or an evangelist,
Mhm.
but to
Okay.
share stories, to subcreate in the Tolkien phrase there. That's my interest in reviewing these stories, finding the best ones, reviewing the best ones. So we have weekly reviews at lorehaven.com. We have our own weekly podcast, Fantastical Truth, which is almost to 200 episodes. We may have crossed that threshold by the time you listen to this episode. And we do articles, news, and a Discord server, the Lorehaven Guild, where we undertake monthly book quests. A curated community there, very safe. Like I'd let homeschooled teenagers in there if their parents are okay with that, because we want to explore challenging stories,
Mhm.
but the best kinds of stories. We really place a value on finding the excellent ones, not just something that someone says, "Hey, I'm a Christian, and the Holy Spirit told me to write this book, so you got to read it." Like, well, as I once heard a Christian author say at a conference in the mid 2000s, if you claim God told you to write that book, sometimes God can't spell and has bad grammar. We don't want to imply in our theology that God does anything less than perfect. But sometimes authors need to pay attention to those human factors and glorify God with excellence in their craft, not just with good intentions.
Well, since you're on that subject, talk to me a little bit about what you feel like makes something a good Christian novel in that fantasy sci-fi space.
Well,
What kind of
first,
what things need to be involved?
So first, define very clearly. I think what counts. What do we mean by a Christian story? Like some people, especially if you grew up evangelical or American evangelical or whatever,
Mhm.
people have an allergy to that phrase. It's not wrong. It just kind of makes them squint a little bit and feel an immune response. What do you mean Christian? Like only people can be Christians? Like, well, I agree and disagree. I
Mhm.
do think that some stories can be Christian where other stories are not. We just clarify that doesn't mean the other stories are bad, always
Mhm.
bad. And that doesn't mean the Christian story is always good or the best or more spiritual. When I say Christian story, I'd basically substitute Christian made story. The story is made Christian by the author in the same way that a person is made Christian by the author of creation. That's what we mean by subcreation. A
Mm.
Christian who is in Christ, who doesn't have a chip on their shoulder, who is actually consistent in their faith, makes the story Christian, whether or not there's a conversion scene or John 3:16 or even a specific reference to God. The book of Esther is accepted as canon in scripture, but it doesn't specifically mention God. But God is there. He is haunting the story. His providence is guiding every decision made by Esther, Mordecai, and even the villains, and even the hapless king Ahasuerus or Xerxes or whatever you call him. Personally, my personal tastes are obviously specific. Specifically about Lorehaven, we'll review any Christian made fantastical published title that we can find that we like. I mean, we get lots of submissions every week, authors taking their shot at a review. So we don't have time for all of them. We tend to prioritize the newer stories and obviously the best stories, so long as they qualify. So right now, I'd say that the most popular genre among Christian-made novels like this is YA fantasy. That is above all the reigning champ. Although middle grade, older middle grade, is definitely catching up. Probably the top Christian-made fantasy right now is the Wingfeather Saga by Andrew Peterson. It's got a TV show and everything. Like it is basically the reigning champ right now, and rightfully so. They are fantastic books, and Andrew Peterson is a very faithful, excellent Christian artist. So I've enjoyed those. Like I enjoy some teen YA fantasy with the strong female character who needs to find herself. But my special interest, because I'm a grown up, I like stories with adult characters, heroes who are dealing with complex issues. Some of the later Frank Peretti novels deal with characters who are facing those kinds of complex issues of being a faithful Christian in the world or their fantastical world. Probably my favorite Christian-made novel of all time is actually Frank Peretti's. I like Illusion, but Frank Peretti's The Visitation is one of my all-time favorites. I actually just recently read Illusion. Like people didn't read it because it wasn't about angels and demons, and people think that's all Frank Peretti can write about. But it is an absolutely wonderful story as well. And there are many, many others I could recommend. Just go lorehaven.com and find the reviews. Of course, Lewis, Tolkien, those are great too. But we want to exalt those as well as exalting the newer authors whom we find.
Now, you mentioned fantastical. What do you how do you describe fantastical? What makes something fantastical versus just standard fiction for you?
Oh, shooting from the hip, I'd say something you don't see every day. Dragons are fantastical. I've never seen one. I've seen spaceships on TV, but they don't get very far, to the moon at best if there's people aboard, and out maybe past the solar system with Voyager 1 or something. But yeah, those are real life fantastical things. Like God has made fantastical creatures, as N.D. Wilson likes to point out, like real creatures, sometimes deep beneath the lowest layers of the ocean, where we just don't see them very often. So our world is a fantastical world. There have been, and some Christians believe continue to be, miracles where God breaks into the world. So I don't say that fantastical is unrealistic. It's just not something you see every day, or something that maybe we have to wait until Christ returns and we get the new heavens and new earth to see every day. Christians live in a world that is now fantastical, even if it doesn't seem like it. But someday, all of the good things that we love about stories, I think, will actually happen in the new heavens and new earth, apart from fighting battles and things like that, because everything will be made new. All the good parts, all the happy moments of fantastical stories will eventually come true. But until now, we can hint at them or celebrate them overtly in these kinds of stories. Fantasy, sci-fi, paranormal, horror, genre blends, all of that stuff.
Well, you mentioned horror a couple of times now, and this is I feel like I'm a little bit of an odd duck in the Christian world, and that first of all, I say I'm not a horror fan, quote unquote fan. I don't go hunting down horror movies and things like that. But I am fascinated by this idea of Christian horror. Do you have some thoughts on that idea? I know some people, like, if you use the word horror and Christian in the same sentence, that is horror to them. They just don't get that idea that this could be a genre or should be a genre. What are your thoughts on that?
I do have thoughts on that. Now, for one thing, I actually avoid the word horror for one simple podcasty reason. It is hard to say. And if you slur the two syllables together, it sounds like a word you might not want to say on a Christian podcast, even if it's in the book of Hosea multiple times, where God's condemning Israel for righteous wrath reasons there. I would say, yeah, paranormal or scary stories. But my thought there, just from a genre perspective, is I prefer horror as a seasoning, not the main course, simply because in real life, especially in an eternal perspective, horror is also a seasoning. All of those terrible things, the scary things, the violence, the thorns and thistles, the dreadful things that are in the world because of human sin will eventually go away. So I'm not fond of a story that focuses only on those things. Like, I've never seen a slasher movie. I don't care to. I know there's certain personalities that resonate with those, maybe because those stories alone seem to reflect the horror that you feel in your own life, or the horror that maybe you feel should have been in your own life if you feel maybe a kind of survivor bias. I think a lot of people, especially young Christian fans, could risk thinking that a horror story or a dark story, a grim, dark, or violent story helps them to level up. Maybe they feel a little sheltered. Maybe they feel like they need to grow up fast. And since they can't go out and fight in a war or be a paramedic saving lives, and their life feels really dull, maybe that kind of story will help them level up. I can understand that a little bit, but I have noted the converse is that people who've been through real wars, older people, senior citizens, for example, who have actually suffered real life horrors that most younger people haven't, what kinds of stories do they like? They're off looking for Hallmark movies. And the very clean Christian movies where no one ever cusses and the violence is all off screen, and there's certainly no blood. They seem to have had their fill of the stuff. So it's just interesting watching human nature to see who is after what. I too don't like horror straight up, but when I do, it's a novel like Bram Stoker's original Dracula, which by now I have read 4 times. And is absolutely stunningly spectacular and relevant to the needs of the current time. Some of the cultural issues that we're dealing with now are, I think, beautifully illustrated by the type of the vampire that Stoker portrayed. Dracula, his wicked parodies of brides, like all of that dysfunction and manipulation in the figure of Count Dracula is something that I think Christian readers need now, and we need more of. We need to be very honest about the type of evil that we face and what this can do to a person. And like the heroes of Dracula, we need to seek the light in that story that will defeat the darkness, not just the darkness for its own sake.
Fascinating. Well, you guys, primarily at Lorehaven, you guys focus on text. You focus on books for the most part. So, are there some new books that you would kind of recommend to the audience right now? Are there some things that have either recently come out, or maybe things that are lesser known by the larger Christian audience that you might recommend right now?
Absolutely. I'm just going over our top reviews, the most recent reviews that we have at lorehaven.com. We try to post new reviews every Friday. We've got a team of volunteers who do this, so you won't see like review by so-and-so because it's by the review team. So to get on the review team is an extremely prestigious and powerful position there. The most recent reviews we record is by, I believe this is an independently published novel called The Guardian. It was described by the reviewer as Prince of Egypt meets Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron. So if you're a fan of late 90s DreamWorks animated features in the traditional 2D sense, this is the story for you. It's basically a retelling of the Exodus story, but with talking horses. So if you like the talking horses of Narnia, and you want a whole story just about talking horses, this is the story for you. It looks like it's skewing teen YA. So that may be a story. If you got a horse crazy teen girl who wants a Christian made story, that's for you there. We try to call out like who the story is best for. That's a really important thing. Like the entire site is actually classified around the interest of readers. Because there's a lot of families out there, especially now, looking for books that not just don't have certain content in them, but I think need to grow beyond that and look for like gospel reflecting virtues that are in the story. So something that is in the story, not just something that's not in the story. There's a book coming out by Sarah Arthur called Once a Queen. The Guardian, by the way, is written by LeVay Bird. Once a Queen is a gentle, intriguing fantasy that brings its world and characters to life with vividness and compassion. That's another fantasy for teen YA readers there. We also reviewed The Voyage of the Dawn Treader because we are wrapping up that book quest in the guild as we record. And then we had a book, another indie published book called A Superhero for Christmas. So just wait about 11 months after we record, and that will seem timely. Again, there's a whole series about superheroes by an author named H.L. Burke, who's also a member of our guild and who just publishes these right and left. So there's so many authors out there who are doing this. There was a Wintry Tale we did. There's a whole publisher we work with called Enclave Publishing that is probably at the top of this game because they were releasing 12 Christian-made fantastical novels per year. Glorious, professional, majestic hardcover books in the fantastical genres. Like a lot of YA fantasy there too. But they go places. The last one we reviewed as I speak is called The Mermaid's Tale. It's standalone by L.E. Richmond. And then we also reviewed Andrew Peterson's book, A Ranger's Guide to Glipwood Forest, set in the Wingfeather world. And then finally, a title, actually, we have an endorsement on the back of it from Enclave Publishing called Steel, Fire from the Gods. The cover of that book features a glorious image of a hovering cybernetic mage wielding elemental magic after the robots managed to take over the world, not with a social credit system, but with elemental magical powers. So our young protagonist must come into his own as the chosen one to overthrow the robot overlords.
Good stuff. Well, how do you guys go about choosing what books you're going to review?
So our review team is an eclectic group with different reading preferences. One of the things we do with our reviews is we want to send that book recommendation to the readers who will most benefit from it. So each review includes like a short description of the book. It's a very short review. Like it's kind of more of a micro review. Like we get in and out inside of a single longer paragraph. We describe the book, let you know like what kind of story this is. Is it fantasy, sci-fi, whatever? And then analyze, specifically asking, did this book meet its own goals for its own audience? And then after that, we show best four, where we reveal who this book, who would most likely enjoy this book. And then we do have a short section called Discern. That doesn't mean like stuff you need to be worried about in this book necessarily, but things you may want to be aware of. You know, every once in a while we get a title that may have some words in there that may give some readers pause, but more likely you could describe these as clean reads, although, you know, I'm not that fond of that term because it implies that the strength of the book is in what it leaves out. But for example, one sci-fi title I pulled up says, you know, occasional violence that is usually mild. Several people commit suicide under strange circumstances. Use of prescribed drugs that shows addiction. And that's for a book called Moonchild Rising, a rare example of science fiction that we review. So our reviewers, like, we get the book. If they want to review the book, they would choose their own titles that they feel they're most likely to enjoy based on the premise, the cover, the genre, maybe the author. And then that improves the chances that the review team member is going to like the book. At Lorehaven, we actually don't want to do negative reviews, not because everything is awesome, but because we're just going to ignore a book if we don't like it, or if it's just objectively not good. You know, should have gone through a few more editing passes, or maybe the cover is not up to par. Like, we'll just pass on a book like that, and we will review a book only mixed positive or higher. And so gearing the type of book towards the reviewer most likely to enjoy that genre really, really helps. Lots of our reviewers like fantasy, for example. Some have a bent toward YA fantasy. Then every once in a while, a sci-fi title comes through, for example, and I'll say, oh, so-and-so, review team member X, like, you've previously expressed an interest in this genre. Would you like to review this? And then every once in a while, we get a really great review. I'll pitch in with a review or two myself, like doing the reviews of the first 3 Chronicles of Narnia.
Very cool. Well, when somebody wants to, you know, you're trying to decide where a book fits. Now, like on your website, you have middle grade, you have YA, and you have adult listed as different categories. And YA has always been an interesting idea to me because I see things labeled as YA, and then I get into the book, and this isn't necessarily Christian or either side. I get into the book, and it it doesn't. It feels like there are subjects that I feel like probably really aren't a good fit for YA, for young adult, but they still get categorized as that. So how do you go about categorizing a book as, middle grade YA versus adult? What kind of things happen there?
Well, if it's a good publisher or a wise independent author, they will have already done that for you. But a lot is indicated simply by the age of the character. If the character is a teenager or just past being a teenager, but the themes are very YA friendly, like something that a reader who's still in high school or maybe in early college would really resonate with. Finding yourself, overcoming trauma, things like that. That's going to make the book YA. And this, by the way, this is me speaking personally, just based on my observations. An agent or a publisher would probably have some more professional language to describe this. That generally indicates the title is YA. Now, interestingly, there are a few books, like, for example, from Enclave Publishing. They have an imprint called Enclave Escape, which is specifically targeted toward young adult readers. If you're not familiar with YA, that's what that stands for, which also includes teenagers. I'd say there's some overlap there. So they have an imprint for these books, but there are some other books they have that I'm actually reading right now that are not labeled YA, but the heroes are like properly young adults, like in their early 20s, for example, or mid 20s. Some of those themes, I think, are still very accessible to a smart reader who's a teenager, maybe an older teenager who wants to be challenged. That's the kind of stuff, for example, that you're going to be dealing with as you turn 18, leave your parents' home, launch into the world for the glory of God. And so those stories can help you think about those things. When I was a teenager, I read The Visitation, which was released in 1999 from Frank Peretti. That's not a YA title, but I give that novel credit for helping me think a little bit more clearly and, more importantly, to imagine the issues that a Christian young person is going to have going out in the world, confronting other denominations, Christians who believe in weird stuff that you've never grown up with, and even what we would now call deconstruction. The hero of The Visitation is a Pentecostal pastor named Travis Jordan. Peretti is one of those few authors, by the way, who will just name denominations and not care. And I love it because he respects them all, but also roasts them all. And I do mean them all. And Travis is a washed-up Pentecostal pastor whose replacement at the church is ready to take this town for Christ. And then into the town arrives a young Messiah who acts like Jesus, who can actually heal people like Jesus, who starts a cult and ends up actually taking this town for, air quotes, Christ. What then does this young pastor do when the basically false Christ arrives and starts out Jesusing the actual Jesus, or seeming to? I read that. It's not YA, but it is something that a young reader could certainly get into. And so there's so many stories that are not labeled YA that a wise reader can still resonate with. That's how we choose. But we also, it's very clear, for example, again, a wise independent author or publisher will go ahead and label the story middle grade, for example. This is for middle grade readers. The struggles, the characters are literally in middle grade. So I was homeschooled, so I have to do a little math to remember what that was for you public schooled saints out there. But that helps. And then stories, for example, it's a shame that some perv out there went and labeled something adult fiction, and then you think it's full of naughty stuff, and it's basically that stuff Christians aren't supposed to read. But fiction for grown-ups, that is what I personally resonate with, because the characters are engaging in families or their career development. Maybe you're off on a spaceship somewhere, or maybe you're a middle-aged knight who's still fighting to save the kingdom and then, keep your wife safe in the cottage at home. That kind of stuff resonates with me because that's where I am. And so really it's just about what the readers will resonate with and whether they can identify with the main character without the main character becoming just a shell for the reader. Someone whom the reader can follow, a Christian figure ought to be the main character, I think, if it's a Christian-made story.
I've always thought this was an interesting process of how do you label a book, one of these or the other, because I came mostly out of TV and film, because I did some work there, and one of the things that they would talk about as in production is that kids wanted to see, especially in the younger areas, kids don't want to see themselves on TV. They want to see people just a little older than they are.
Yes.
So like, so you've got middle schoolers who want to watch high school students, and high school students who want to watch college students, and college students who want to watch young adults that are out in the world. So I've always wondered, when I look at books, I always wonder if they are thinking the same way. But I feel like sometimes they don't think it that same way.
Oh, I think that's assuredly an issue with visual entertainment. I think the difference with books, is, certainly for Christian readers, though, is, for example, if you are a middle grader, roughly 8 to 12 or so, in a Christian family, then optimally your parents are the ones getting the books for you. They're fetching them from the library, or if you go to public school, there's a lot more Christian parents, rightfully so, I think, who are being much more discerning about the kind of books you pick up from the public school library. There's a whole movement and controversy about that we needn't get into, but I do agree that the parents ought to be discerning those kinds of titles, lest we fall into the trap I think you alluded to earlier, where you've got a book that's labeled YA from a mainstream publisher, and then you open it up and wait a minute, this is not appropriate for teenagers, this is not appropriate for young adults who are still trying to find themselves. There are all these themes in here that are alien to a biblical worldview and common sense, that will wreck someone whose brain and heart are still developing. Stories have power for good, but also for great evil. And you need stories that'll wrestle with themes like this, but not glorify them. Scripture warns against those who call good evil and evil good. And there are many general market YA titles who do this. And so that doesn't mean no Christian should read these ever, but a Christian who is trained should be able to engage these stories. And most teenagers have not. That's why we recommend, hey, stick with the Christian made YA stuff. It's not going to be completely safe, fun for the whole family, nothing objectionable, perfectly clean, but the challenges in there are being more well thought out by the Christian author, especially if it's from a reputable publisher like Enclave or some of the other publishers and authors we work with. That's one big reason why we do the reviews, because we're going to call out something like that, something that you may need to talk about, even if you still buy the book and read it, because we want to sell books. We want Christian authors to do well and find their audience. So we get a lot of Christian authors approaching us then to sponsor the podcast, Fantastical Truth, or just get the review. Reviews are free if we choose it. But there's lots of other ways that folks, if you're a Christian author, can reach new readers through Lorehaven.
Now, you also have a section on the site called On Screen. Now, and you mentioned primarily you guys do books. That's your big thing. But so what kind of stuff will we find on the On Screen section?
Well, On Screen is where we do that popular culture engagement. It's effectively brought to you by the pop culture parent. We've got the purchase link there. Every once in a while, yes, a story will come out that causes so much discussion and that does something notable, or is just famous enough to warrant an article. One of the things we've been keeping up with, for example, is The Chosen. Now, that isn't a fantastical story. There's no dragons or spaceships in there. But I would say that biblical fiction is a cousin genre to fantastical stories, because it's the original hero, Jesus Christ, and The Chosen creator, showrunner Dallas Jenkins has broken so much ground in Christians making an amazing cultural work that is both well thought out and in-depth and reaching people who are not Christians. So that's something that we keep up with on-screen articles. We also sort there any of our podcast episodes, Fantastical Truth, that address general popular culture. For example, last January, we did an episode called Which Villains Beat the Superheroes in 2023 Flopbuster Films. Everybody's talking about the DC and Marvel superheroes that just could not get off the ground last year. And so, well, we thought we'd just do one episode about it, but we're not going to be that's not going to define our platform. We want to celebrate stories, not just roast them. But another thing we're keeping up with is the Daily Wire, which is primarily known for conservative hot takes and podcasts on the cultural conservative side. They are doing a TV show, an honest to goodness streaming series, fairly high budget too, based on the Christian-made series, the Pendragon Cycle. It's been around for a while, 4 or 5 books, if I recall correctly, but they're adapting it for the screen. And so suddenly, that guy who's, spitting fire on my podcast is now involved with a company that is doing Christian-made fantasy, which is basically my business. So, wow, what a crossover. We've got to keep up with this. And it's been fun to watch that. And it's something we're definitely going to keep an eye on because I think they're going to release it in 2024. But as of this recording, we've also got 2 articles by 2 of our writers there. A.D. Sheehan wrote about Rebel Moon, the space opera on Netflix that's apparently done very well. It's a new space opera franchise over there. And then we also had an author who wrote about some of the interesting self-focus of the Frozen 2 Disney sequel that bears some discernment and some discussion. Like, again, we don't want to roast stuff, but every once in a while, I mean, all the time, really, like stories like that call for discernment. And so it's a way for us to signal, hey guys, we're not doing the Christian alternative thing. Like all of those other stories are terrible and they're blasphemous and they exalt the devil. So you need the Christian alternative, even if it's lame. We want to engage with those popular stories too, like something that more you guys do, the Christian Nerds Unite, but only every once in a while because you guys have it covered. There's lots of websites that have that stuff covered. There's Good Takes at the Gospel Coalition. Christ and Pop Culture is still going at it. I used to write for them. And so I want to keep our niche, but every once in a while, do a shout out to some of these stories that bear extra discussion.
Well, what is there anything else that Lorehaven is doing or has upcoming that you'd want to share that maybe something we haven't discussed yet?
Well, I definitely want to talk about the podcast. We are at or past 200 episodes. That's Fantastical Truth. You can find that on all the platforms. That really has been the biggest driver of growth for us, I think, because people listen to podcasts and especially about books and issues related to books. Our very last episode as we speak is how do fantastical books get made with my friend Jamie Foley, who's the creative director at Enclave Publishing. Just a really fascinating glimpse behind the scenes of not, author stuff, like how these books are acquired, the insider stuff, but what happens after the book is acquired, how does it get put together on the page? How do you get the cover looking so awesome and all of that? Just really great way to explore that. And we also did an episode with Thomas Umstead Jr., who is a fantastic voice, helping equip Christian authors to make and market their own novels, whether independently published or traditional. He had written an amazing article at the agency blog of the Steve Lobby Agency that we just had to talk to him about. Should stories minimize morality to advance personal liberation? Now, that's one of our discernment shows. Like you pick up a book, even sometimes by a Christian author, and like, okay, suddenly we seem to be giving the main character license to do anything, whether it's vengeance or just narcissism, because they've had a tragic backstory. Why are we being provoked to feel only empathy and not also challenged for the hero or heroine? Not to ignore or suppress the pain, but to use that in more healthy directions. Like superheroes, for example, the more super they get and the less heroic they get, the worse the story gets. And so Thomas really brought that out. We release new episodes every Tuesday, just 2 holiday breaks per year. And we've been doing that for about 4 years. And you can subscribe free at any podcast streaming service by just looking for Lorehaven or looking for Fantastical Truth. There's also the Guild, the Discord server. We do the monthly book quests through the best Christian-made fantasy we can find. As we record, I'm just wrapping up the Voyage to the Dawn Treader book quest, and then we're about to start a new quest through a Christian title published in the 2010s, I think, called Heartless. So it's kind of a Valentine's Day type theme there.
Talk to me about what a book quest is.
Okay, so book quest is a book club. But most people can't get to book clubs unless they're retired and into knitting and reading a lot of books. We tried to do like a real book club, and it's hard to get everybody together. So we thought, people like gaming and they like Discord, and Discord like kind of restores to me some of that energy of the fan forums that I remember fondly from the 2000s. And so it's a great way to have a social media platform that's focused specifically not on personalities or likes, but on the ideas. And so that is mainly the main hub of discussion for Lorehaven readers and the podcast listeners. So every month we do a new book club through a Christian made title that we find. I think we've been doing that for 2 or 3 years now. There's been dozens of them so far, and we are just getting started. There's almost 300 heroes in there, but you can only join by subscribing free at lorehaven.com. That's how you get all the good stuff, of course. You just subscribe free. We are sponsor supported. A lot of great authors and publishers are able to put their might behind us and continue to get their stories word out.
Awesome. Well, anything else to share before I ask you where people can find you?
Yes, indeed. Lord willing, and if my schedule clears this year, we're going to be publishing books, not novels, because we're a nonfiction about fiction publisher. But I'm really, really into the idea now of taking some of the material we've made specifically for the Lorehaven Guild and using this to help support families, like come alongside some of the books that we already know and love, and then getting the most out of them for the glory of God. Not to say you toss a book at your kid, like, here, go read this. It's a clean read, but coming alongside now, like some books are for kids and middle graders and teenagers and YA and parents all at once, like the Chronicles of Narnia. So I think there's a real need now for a resource to come along and not just say, Aslan equal Jesus, which we've heard before. Like we know that Aslan is the proposal of Jesus, but hey, what about Tumnus? What are the Greek gods doing in here? What in the world is Silenus doing, riding his donkey around and turning rivers into wine? Like, what is going on in Prince Caspian? Like, this feels kind of pagan. Like, well, that's a little scary. But Lewis does something with images like that ought to just delight the hearts of the discerning reader once you see that he is showing that Aslan is in charge of everything in Narnia. Aslan is king. Aslan is effectively God. And all the others are just little lowercase g gods running around in charge of the rivers and the wells and such. That's the kind of stuff I love to bring out in any independently published print resources that we have. But stay tuned at lorehaven.com for any updates about that this year.
Awesome. Well, where can we find you? Where can people follow Lorehaven? What's the best ways to get connected?
Definitely lorehaven.com. You can sign up free and choose which updates you get. News articles, the weekly podcasts, the weekly reviews. Sign up free and we will send you the exclusive invitation code to jump into the portal that leads to our Castle in the Cloud, the Lorehaven Guild on Discord. And then you can join the thriving community of readers who want to celebrate and discern these stories for God's glory. It is dangerous to go into a book alone, so take this. You need a community of faithful readers, just like any Christian needs a community of saints in the local church. We are not a church, but we aim to support the missions of local churches by helping people who already love these stories discover why and how they should love them.
Awesome. Well, Stephen, it has been great having you on the show today. And I definitely look forward to having you back sometime later next year.
That's going to be fun. I'm already planning something big. Hopefully that works, and I'll get to come back on at a time that works best for everybody. Hey, Godspeed for what you all do. I love this idea of engaging with the geek culture for the glory of God, whether or not it's made by Christians. Like, there is good stuff in a whole lot of stories. It calls for discernment and enjoyment with wisdom.
Absolutely. Great to have you on the show. Check out the links down in the show notes below. Well, that's all I have for you today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, just click all those links down there. That way you can keep up with us anytime we put out new content. You can find all of our social links and links to our YouTube channel and to our online store at ChristianNerdsUnite.com. If you enjoy the show and want to help even more, consider becoming a supporter on Patreon. All of our Patreon levels have great benefits and make a huge difference in the ministry we're able to do. Supporters will also get to hear exclusive stories of believers we're serving around the world through our ministry partners. To check it out or to partner with us, go to patreon.com/Christian Nerds Unite or ChristianNerdsUnite.com and click support in the menu. And don't forget to check out Christian Nerd HQ for more great podcasts. Before you go, I do want to leave you with this blessing from Ephesians 3. I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the Lord's holy people to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. We'll see you next week. Blessings.
Hey.